Very pleased to be here. As mentioned, I'm a software investor, specifically focusing on cybersecurity. Particularly excited to talk to Vince and Vladimir today, as Bank of England, known as a fantastic institution, Revolut as kind of the modern day behemoth in the financial world. So two very contrasting institutions, but also both guys, when I spoke to them last week, shared a lot of very common thoughts that aren't just on the tools that you use, but in terms of the culture and the people aspect of the challenges when it comes to insider threat and working from home. So yeah, without further ado, Vince from Bank of England, great to have you up here, and I suppose hand over to you to do a quick intro.
Good afternoon, my name is Vince King from the Bank of England. I always start my introduction by saying I'm a reformed developer. So I always find myself as a problem solver, and it's the likes of me that I find difficult to control in this modern world. As a developer, I would always try and find a way around some of the controls and restrictions I've been put in. So in the best sense, I'm trying to say that I was an insider threat at the time. I always prefix that I'm reformed, so I'm all good, and now I'm, what's the phrase, I'm poacher turned gamekeeper. So I work for cybersecurity division, working vulnerability management. I also do incident response, and we are doing a lot in the data space to also understand what our vulnerabilities are, where they're coming from, and communicate those more widely with those people that give us the money to do what we do.
Excellent, thank you, Vince. And Vladimir, thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Vladimir. I'm leading the threat intelligence at Revolut Bank. It's been an exciting journey over the past years as the company grows. And obviously, I think the interesting point compared to us in comparison to Bank of England is that initially we were kind of a startup, cloud-ready company. And as we scaled, we almost had to adopt the remote culture due to COVID and due to the global expansion. So really happy to be here.
Great, thank you very much, guys. So yeah, starting off with our first question for today. Why are employees still one of the biggest threats to a business is security? Vince, do you want to go?
So that's the old adage, people are our greatest resource, but they also present the greatest risk. Our responsibility is education and making people understand why, if we say no, why we're saying no. And I think that's a huge barrier that I always faced when engaging with cyber. I was just told no without any context. So bringing them along on the cyber journey is hugely important, because at the end of the day, without them, there's very little we can do as an institution, as companies, as organizations.
Excellent, thank you. And Vladimir, any comments to add?
Well, yeah, I'd say that human beings, they have a very unpredictable nature. I mean, you can predict them, but it's something that you cannot fully control compared to tech. So it's something that always going to possess risk, no matter what we do. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And I know, Vince, that you mentioned that a lot of your role has also been around the education piece, but there's only so much education you can be and so much hand-holding. Eventually, the employee is going to be left by themselves. And I suppose, how does that present a challenge to you? How are you thinking about that problem?
So I've seen in a lot of organizations that once you get in the door, there's a lot of training, a lot of induction, a lot of effort puts into you as a new employee, as a new member of staff. But too often I see that tails off very quickly. And once you're educated and that's done. Continued education and awareness training is hugely important. We regularly within the bank run awareness training sessions. We have a whole month of awareness training coming up in October. And one of the interesting things about the pandemic is how we've had to face into that, because we can't get people into the room anymore. But on the flip side of that, attendance has actually been up, because it's easier to flick from one virtual meeting to another rather than actually having to go and sit into a room as these nice people are here listening to people talk at you.
Excellent, thank you. Before we move on to our second question, I also forgot to mention at the beginning that you can go to your Beretta app to ask any questions that we'll get to after our session. So to do that, just go to your Beretta app, go to the bottom toolbar, click the three dots, and then click Q&A. So yeah, we'd love to hear your questions both from anyone here and online. So on to our second question. What cybersecurity vulnerabilities are raised due to the increasing number of remote workers? Vince, do you want to go again first?
Yeah, so what have we faced? We have moved from, like many organizations in the very first few weeks or months, moving from sustainability of remote workers to survival. Just the sheer volume of people working remotely, it was a challenge that a lot of my colleagues in technology stood up and made it a success. One of the things that we then came to realize is with vulnerabilities coming out, we've seen the weaponization of these vulnerabilities actually happen a lot quicker. And that forced us then to rethink our patching schedule. So normally patch Tuesday, exploit Wednesday, if anyone's technical enough to be in that realm. That has to be done quicker, that turnaround, that releasing of patching. But doing that to 6,000 workers who are all remote caused a technical challenge. And then similarly with the pandemic, I think has made a lot of organizations want to move to the cloud at speed. And that alone is causing its own challenges. And these are things as cybersecurity. I always go back to cybersecurity as a business enabler. We have to stop saying no, and we have to say yes, but with these guardrails.
Mm-hmm. Makes complete sense. And we've got a couple of questions actually, but before we do, Vladimir, do you want to add some points to that?
Yeah, I think as the world switches to the remote working, obviously they use the employee behavior switched as well, the apps that they eventually tend to use. We've seen some, some of the famous video conferencing being targeted like Zoom. So we can expect calendars being targeted as probably as when you work remotely, you have to structure your time daily. Literally you put more information online, which is bad. So we can just wait and see them being targeted and probably successfully exploited. So I'd say we as a company, we're fully remote right now. We still have those kind of hot desking labs, but we're trying to educate our own employees to emphasize that, right now the cybersecurity becomes much more personal as they work from home, because now their home is their workplace. Obviously, we're trying to find the balance here, and not to cross the lines, like doing the on-site checks or whatever. But nevertheless, it's still happening, and they have to map those company risks to their own personal environment and to their home environment. So, what type of router they use? Are they using their laptop solely for work, or now you can do something else there, like, browsing news sites and so on. All of that still needs to be taken into account. So with the employee behavior change, that comes the new space for the threat actors to exploit, these changes. And that's what potentially might happen next.
Great, thank you. And I suppose, kind of following on that, I think, Vince, you mentioned the likes of, say, a Patch Tuesday, and I was just thinking in terms of days of the week, we often know that Friday is a great day to be launching a cybersecurity attack. And I was wondering if that's factoring into your guys' thinking in terms of, everyone's now, especially in this hybrid world, working remotely, using their own devices. Is that itself throw up a challenge of maybe people using their own devices on the weekend, or just in general, how are you thinking about that kind of BYOD issue at the moment?
So as Vladimir said, we've gone from a situation of working at home to living at work. So that barrier between work and home life has blurred slightly. So work devices are possibly getting used a little more often because they're on all the time. They're sitting on a desk or on your knee, however you're able to work. So bringing your own devices provides its own set of challenges and the controls that are needed around that. But I think the devices are actually getting bigger now because laptops are being used at home, for any parents among us, for any of us who had kids, were they getting used for homework when they were being done at home because there was a lack of connectivity or a lack of resources? Very likely. And these do cause challenges and worries for cyber divisions.
So moving on to our next question, which is around how companies can adapt their cybersecurity to the new hybrid working environment of an office and remote working. I suppose Revolut have a bit more of an advantage here in terms of it's probably the way the company was kind of set up from the beginning, was to have that flexibility. So interested to know if that felt you had an advantage, kind of going into the pandemic, but kind of as we are now, what are you guys doing to adapt, to prepare?
Yeah, so we've been facing these challenges from start. We had a bit more time to trying to find the right solution here. I can see that there is no perfect solution. As a good example, a good example is the messenger culture. So we don't tend to use email much. We use mostly the messenger, and obviously the messengers people tend to use on their own devices. So we have bring your own device policy, and just general as a company's culture is get it done, always online. So it's kind of more of a work life. So you need to be constantly accessible, and obviously people use their own devices. And how you'd prevent the data leakage there? Okay, you can enforce the work profile. You can do whatever you want, but person can still just make screenshots of the screen, or he can just write it down, or he can make photos. He can just scan the laptop screen if he wants, unless you're going to require him to switch on the camera all the time. So probably the only way to successfully trying to secure this hybrid or fully remote model is by enforcing the culture. Because if there is an insider and he wants to leak data, he will leak data. Unless, we're speaking about the remote working, not about some isolated environments. So enforcing the culture, making sure that everyone feels a part of this, part of the company. Also making sure that there is a first point of contact in the company. If something strange starts to happen, or if your colleague, he starts to being more isolative and so on. It can be a well-being problem as well, but nevertheless can be a security problem. But generally enforcing this culture and maybe in some way increasing the transparency for the security department, that's important as well. Obviously not worth mentioning logging. So if most of the employees are working remotely, you need to log everything. Because it's not even about watching what people do, but it's all about doing the right steps after the incident happens. The worst that can ever happen is when something happened and you have no idea how it happened. So eventually it creates this known unknown in your company, which grows into even a bigger problem, and it can disrupt all the operations. If you think that there is someone, you don't know whom, it can stop all the operations then. So logging is important. Probably in every company, it's inevitable that someday leak will happen. But you need to ensure that you have all the controls to find out how it happened, why it happened, and obviously implement some measures so it never happens again.
Excellent. I suppose we know there's a plethora of tools out there that you can use. But I think one of the phrases that stuck in my head when we spoke last week was that you don't want to play cat and mouse with your employees. Yeah. So it's not just about what you can do physically, but essentially having still that trust you have with your employees. So how do you think about that, just having that right balance in terms of like what security measures you can have in place, but making sure that you're not disrupting the culture?
Yeah, I think, I remember our chat, it's kind of an interesting issue. So the more security controls you put around the employee, and the more you get to the point when the employee starts feel like he's being controlled, like there is a wall, and eventually you might push him to the idea to play this cat and mouse game. So what if they control this and that, then unintentionally your brain gonna start thinking, okay, so probably they don't control this stuff, or there is this browser with this VPN I can enable, and probably this stuff is not controlled. So building this this trustful culture and not making people feel like they're being watched all the time, but meanwhile kind of softly controlling them on the back end. That's a really good way of doing it. At the same time, I know that there is some counter research about the slippery slope. So if you want to prevent the bigger crime, you want to make sure that the small crimes are being reacted to and being escalated. So I think there are two contradictory ways to handle it. Obviously, as we're still a startup, we're a bank, we're in the private sector, building this trust is a better way for us. Though for some other companies, I can easily imagine that preventing the slippery slope is the best way to go.
Excellent, thank you. And I suppose, yeah, Vince, over to you. I think, obviously, Bank of England being a fantastic institution, but considering I've seen the Roman murals inside the bank, quite a different culture in terms of what you guys had to adapt to when the pandemic hit. What was that like in terms of you scaling up your response and the way you dealt with everything? Great to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think like many other organizations, we had a very steep curve to climb in the first few weeks to make sure that we were doing everything we could to do remote working as safely and securely as possible. Out of the pandemic itself, as I mentioned previously, we hold an awareness month within the bank where we try and raise just cyber awareness both within the bank and at home with our employees. And that at home bit we're focusing more and more on that because we're spending more time at home. But we're also finding, as I mentioned also, that we were forced to have it virtually last year. It has actually turned into a successful effort, and we're going to be hosting it virtually this year as well. Because if you read the surveys, nationwide, 9 out of 10 employees want to continue working from home. Whether they'll be allowed to going forward, that's a different discussion, but as technology, as cyber specialists, we have to reckon that that is going to happen, and we have to keep every one of those safe.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, on to our next question, which is how can organizations prevent individuals in the business leaking data? Vladimir, I don't know if you want to start on this one again.
Yeah, I think it it touches the previous answers that I provided. So again, logging is really important. You need to know what person looked at this screen this same moment, and that's really important. From my experience in Revolut as well, that's something that that's a must. And also the security culture. There are several types of the insider leakers, of the whistleblowers. There are different motivations, and you need to take into account all of them. Because one of the things that I've seen is the unintentional leaking, due to the culture difference. Because we're based in the UK, we're kind of very much UK driven in terms of values and so on. But as we expand all around the world, we expand to some other countries, developing markets, and the work culture there can be completely different. And for example, if for someone to show his friends something is normal there, it's not normal just generally corporately speaking. So to make sure that everyone culturally stays on the same line, and that during the onboarding process, the people are getting proper, they're getting proper explanation of what's possible, what's not possible, why it's not possible, what are our company values, what happens if someone leaks data, what happens if you suspect someone leaking data, whom you should approach to. That's really important, trying to create this unified culture. And it's a big challenge for us, as I mentioned, where we're expanding to new markets, where we're purely global, and yes, that's a really big challenge that we're facing and we're working on.
Excellent, thank you. And obviously, yeah, as you kind of mentioned, a lot of it comes down to education, training, awareness. Vince, I think with the Bank of England, you mentioned, it's obviously that education piece is big, but also you're thinking around actually what is sensitive data as well. So you've made some progress there, haven't you?
Yeah, so we are going through the introduction of a new classification scheme. Historically, we had created our own. We had a single classification called unclassified, and in retrospect, that caused people to overclassify because they didn't think unclassified was free to share, it wasn't public information, so everything was bank confidential. We're moving to a traffic light system that is more internationally used, and again, the education piece around that. But one of the biggest things that we found, and through my work with collecting a lot of data over the pandemic from our cybersecurity tools, was printing. Printing was just dropped off a cliff. We were printing thousands of pages a day, and printing for cybersecurity experts causes an issue because it's crossing a trust boundary. You can have all the tools, and I'm a huge fan of logs, log everything, watch everything, just because I'm nosy particularly, but we can control it when it's on someone's screen. But as soon as they print that and walk out the door, we have no idea. It helped the fact that no one was traveling. We lost so few devices over the last 18 months, no laptops, no mobile phones, no RSA tokens, but we will start to see that climb back up as people come back in. But even things like printing, when people come back in, we have to embrace that. We have to grab that opportunity to go, well, you lived for 18 months without printing something. Do you really need to print it now? Because immediately you're closing off the potential for data loss.
Wise words. So on to our next question, which is, which safeguards should be implemented to protect financial information? Vince, you okay if I go straight back to you?
Yeah, sure. Not to steal Vladimir's thunder, but all the controls should be put in all the time. People, as I say, are just genuinely our biggest risk. But if you look at the information that's out there, it's not applications particularly are getting attacked or making the headline. It's all about misconfiguration. So again, we're moving to cloud at speed. We're running before we can actually walk some organizations, and putting up the guardrails to just make sure that people are enabled, because it goes back to my earlier point that we should be a business enabler, but they're enabled in the right way. They're enabled with safeguards, with when you go bowling and you have those little rails at either side. That's what I want to put in place.
Excellent, thank you. And Vladimir, I suppose the maybe more challenging employees can be the ones who are a bit more technically gifted. How do you think about that, particularly with your kind of developers potentially at Revolut?
Oh yeah, obviously in terms of awareness and general policy enforcement, you'd have to keep in mind to which department you're speaking about. So for example, in terms of developers, one of the risks that you might consider is being ransomed, right? Someone just launching malicious code, because there is no working, as far as I know, ransomware sample for the cloud things. But also there are some POCs and there are ways to replicate yourself of someone just launching those ransom code in the cloud, one of your own people, and then just I don't know, asking for ransom or flying away, or the many scenarios that can happen. So yeah, obviously when you implement these controls, the controls and awareness you have to enforce is very different for your legal department and say for your back-end engineers. So you have to adopt, so your security awareness and generally, I'd say, security enforcement programs should be relatively flexible on the high level and getting more tailored and more specialized once you implement more low-tier controls.
Great, thank you guys. So on to the next question, which is a favorite of mine, around phishing scams and how to prevent them. I've worked with a few CISOs in the past, none of which have been happy with their current kind of setup. So yeah, I suppose the question is for you guys, is training just the answer to combat phishing, or how else are you guys thinking about this challenge? Vince?
So we run regular phishing campaigns internally. We also have the capability for someone to report and send a suspicious email through to be investigated further, because some of them are actual genuine emails and those need to they may save a business purpose. But the phishing campaigns are hugely important. Over the pandemic, phishing scams rose by 600%, typically around some COVID cure or some new policy that was coming in, a lot of travel information. So these were triggering people to click a lot more and getting people the information they need to help them spot these phishing emails was incredibly important, but not just at one level, at all levels. Spear phishing is hugely important to combat, because the higher you go, the bigger the target you have on your back. Now, some people will say, you can't send the governor of the Bank of England a phishing email. Does he receive them? Yes. Will he be a target? Yes. So you have to have the support of the management and the executives to be able to say, we are running this in as real life situation as possible.
Yeah, and I think something I've heard often is organizations really trying to celebrate anyone who has any doubt over an email, kind of bringing that up to security teams. And I suppose, with Revolut, Vladimir, how do you guys think about that? How do you go about the training, creating the right culture around preventing attacks?
Yeah, also we run self-phishing campaigns as well. We try to, I won't say we try to gamify it, but try to make it a bit more lively and interactive. I know praising those who accomplish it, who don't click the links, and also re-educating those who click the links. Also, two other points could be worth to mentioning is that we have a dedicated point of contact in our company that if someone received a phishing email on his work mail or on his personal mail, or he receives any suspicious message, no matter if it's work-related or not work-related, they can always go there, can ask questions, and they're going to get our expertise. And it's literally almost not 24/7, but like 14 hours a day. So we have this point of contact dedicated, and it provides some really good results. As you know, the more you educate your employees, eventually some of them pick this up and start educating their colleagues. So it was really good practice. Another thing that we implemented is our executive awareness program. As Vince correctly mentioned, frequently the execs getting spearphished and specifically targeted by the threat actors. And in this sense, it's important to run the program which is going to be interesting to them, because many of them have very short attention span. So what we do, we're trying to map those cyber risks which they face on their day-to-day routine to the personal environment as well. So literally doing almost like a consulting session for those key employees with a high access or who get targeted. So after he gets a phishing email, then we book a 2-hour slot and just go through all his routine. What's the best practice? What's the worst practice? Where you might be leaking data? What's your exposure by chance? If you have exposure, then where did they find your email? They find your email here. Okay, well we can do something around it. And by educating them, we building the bridge between the security department and the executives, which also plays a really good role. Because when people are speaking about security awareness, they only normally know that they only normally mean the low tier and medium tier employees. They never think about the C level or E level. While those people, logically, they're the ones who might get targeted if there can be some, high-profile attack. So running this program, I think it gave some really good results, and also helped us to properly, to get the proper conversation and proper traction at this level in security.
Excellent. And I suppose zooming out a little bit to kind of the broader challenges of just, I suppose, employees working from home. What are the other things that a company can do to ensure that your cybersecurity controls are effective?
So it's, again, the cyber controls are put in place to hopefully very light touch protect people from attackers, but also from themselves. One of the campaigns that we're trying to do is increase people's awareness of their own cyber risk. So giving them access to protective tools that they can use at home. We all say that passwords should be strong, they should be different for every account you have, because if one gets pwned, then potentially you're going to have others. But even as a cybersecurity expert, I can confidently say we have the same password for a lot of our social networks, for a lot of our email accounts. Giving employees a tool as simple as a password vault that they can use at home, and it's an enterprise level, and it's fully paid for, there's no ads, that is improving their behavior at home. It's then educating the other people in that household, and all in all, it's making them and us as an institution a safer place.
Excellent, thank you. So next question is, what is the best way for organizations to safeguard its data from accidental malicious data leaks? Vince, perhaps go straight back to you.
again, not one to steal Vladimir's thunder, but tooling. And the tooling can be put in place, but the most important thing is to have the processes to use that information. So if it is happening, why is it happening? How often is it happening? One of the most important processes that we have in place is the ability to report a data loss incident. If you don't know that there's been a data loss, then there's nothing you can do about it. So all the controls about encryption at rest and in transit, fewer things are being lost, is all great, but you have to know about the incidents themselves. So getting the confidence and not making it a punishable offence to report that something's gone on.
Mm-hmm. And how do you enforce that kind of culture process of reporting?
Again, all awareness and education and giving examples of things that could happen, not necessarily that have happened, and having a very clear and defined process that's shared across the whole institution of, if it happens, call this number, click on this link on the intranet and report it. Don't sit on it for a long time and just report it, because we need to know.
Yeah, and I think, Vladimir, a kind of similar story at Revolut. Please share.
Yeah, I think to make this, I would say, a comfortable reporting culture. So actually getting back to our Friday chat, if the person loses his laptop or the phone, he shouldn't be feeling like, he shouldn't be afraid to report it. So if you lost it, it's fine. It happens to everyone. If you lost it, just report it straight ahead. If it's even 3 a.m., report it, we'll lock it. And also having some endpoint controls like SSO and and some other ones which allows you to auto block, and basically which makes someone losing his credentials not a worthwhile risk. It's still a risk, but it's not a big thing. In terms of leaking that data, third-party risk, that's really important. And by third-party risk, I don't mean the critical vendors to your company, but those small vendors like browser plugins. As it might not necessarily be someone breaching the plugin or finding vulnerability in it. It can be just ownership change. Or like some third party bought this browser plugin, got access to all the source code, push the update, and then here you go, information is leaked. So third party risk, I can talk about the fourth party risk, but we can go very far with it. But third party risk is really important in this sense, and many companies they have in the scope those critical big vendors, but they completely miss those small companies, or the small comfortable add-ons used by your developers, something like to search tabs or manage your time. They really miss it. Well, those small things can have the big access to all the data. So it's important to have the combined approach here in terms of monitoring, whitelisting, blocklist awareness.
Great. I feel like we've already covered a lot of it already. Thanks for your great points. But to add, is there anything you guys would comment on in terms of particularly stopping malicious data leaks? Any other, I suppose, internal policies or controls you guys have in place there? So,
as I say, I'm a big fan of classification. You have to know what is sensitive data, what is critical data for your organization. But as Vladimir said earlier, if someone really wants to leak that data, whether it's a screenshot on their phone or taking a photocopy of their screen, anything like that, you can only protect people so far, and then you have to have all the tooling, the people, and the process all in place to do the best you can.
Mm-hmm. And Vladimir, anything to add?
I think to stop the insider leak problem at its roots, you need to invest some time in the recruitment process and take into account the culture of the person, what's his social attributes, not just, okay, he knows all these languages, he coded this, and that's fine. So you need to have a more integrated approach when in your recruitment. And even in this case, it demands some collaboration between the security department in the company, between the HR, and so that HR is aware about the certain risks, about the certain cases. So investing a bit more time from start might save you a fortune later.
Excellent. And any comments as well in terms of the tools, like having the right SIEM, SOAR, etc. I mean, I suppose all of the above that you guys would have, or any kind of tips in terms of, what you guys look out for in terms of, having the right alert thresholds and all these sort of things. How are you guys thinking about that?
So one of the issues that is affecting the whole industry, and it was mentioned in one of the earlier panels, was about recruitment and the people that you get in. All the tooling in the world is wonderful and effective, but having someone who could triage that so you're not overwhelmed, and again, as Vladimir was saying earlier, more logging is always a good thing, but you can become overwhelmed if you haven't got the right people in place to say, that's fine, we don't need to worry about that, and this is an actual issue that we have to investigate. So again, not just education on a high level, but investing in staff, and especially those almost first responders for cyber incidents, is hugely, hugely important.
Yeah, I think logging is really important, but also what I like about Revolut, we have this build yourself culture. So I suggest companies not to be afraid of trying to build their own internal solutions for that, instead of just looking at the market. As the market, there are some solutions available, but none of them is ideal, honestly. I won't do any kind of product placement or product shaming, but nevertheless, it's still sometimes it's easier to make something tailored to your own needs in-house, either fully develop yourself or maybe integrate with all the solutions, and it might help a lot. In terms of logging, besides just the forensic benefit of the logging, there is also the fact that you keep collecting the soft data, and once you collect enough data, it can help you to identify the patterns. Why it helps you to identify the patterns, and you can just apply some simple machine learning model on top and automate it, which is the end goal in this case, probably security automation. So logging from early start, from your first day as you founded the company, just do collect logs, collect information, because then it might play a really good role when you have to automate things and be more efficient.
Great. We're down to our last question, and we've already got some great audience questions. So any more, please do add, and we'll get to them. Final question is, how is the increased amount of unstructured data being created and shared impacting the likelihood of internal error?
As I mentioned before, the big breaches that we hear, they're not necessarily a persistent threat. It is someone has got a bit of data and they have been given the ability to put it into a shared area without any encryption or protection. And again, I always go back to the guardrails, giving people the ability to do what they need to do, but in a safe manner. So those guardrails will prevent 90% of these breaches. Yeah,
Misconfigured servers, unintentional leaks, forgotten, a password reuse, as a classic thing. So I fully support the Vincent's point. And I think it's worth mentioning, if someone ever decides to breach into your company, they will breach. There is no such thing as perfect security. It will happen one day. It just depends who will do this from the business point of view. So the most you can do is trying to implement some controls, trying to enforce this culture. Worth mentioning, NCSE has some brilliant guidance for new companies, and generally, really, the material is really, really good. They're doing a great job. But obviously, it's you cannot do magic, and there is no universal some sort of universal setup you can have.
Great, thank you guys. Well, I think we'll move on to Q&A now for the final few minutes. First question we have is, how do you reduce the risk of data leakage for customer services when people are working from home? Either of you take that.
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, it depends which customer services you're talking about, because some, normally a part of it companies tend to outsource, some of them have internally. So in terms of internal ones, getting back to my point, when you implement some controls and when you're trying to enforce some sort of a culture or policies, you need to take into account whom you're speaking to. So once we get to, once we, in terms of customer support, you need to take into account the background and the culture that exists in this office. What we are doing is that we set up a very good pipeline. So literally the customer support, they tend to deal with some of the phishing cases related to our customers. And all these phishing cases, about 25 to 30 a day, it all goes to us eventually. So we do the post-escalation. For example, during past months, we blocked about 300 numbers belonging to this fake HMRC scam. And eventually this, it takes our time, and it means, it makes you work not 24/7, but quite long hours. But at the same time, it builds this trust between the security and the customer support. And in the customer support, it builds a security mindset. And eventually, after a year and a half, you start seeing those kind of local security champions organically emerging in the customer support department and just spreading this knowledge and feeling that and spreading this vibe that they're doing the right thing, that they're helping the customers to fight the crime, they're helping to educate this and that. So I would say providing some sort of a correct guidelines for the customer support, that's really important. And obviously doing your best to understand the threats around your customers. That's also very important for us as a company, and it gives us some great lessons, and also helps us to escape our professional cage. When you think that everyone knows it, but in fact it's just people who work in your area, they know this. So I'd say stronger collaboration and looking at customer support not like as a crowd that you're trying to manage and trying to control, but because the customer support department has your customers, so they also have to take care about someone. So, and playing it the right way, then it can give you some good results. In our case, it did.
Great, thank you. So yeah, on to the next question, which is reminding me of the case of Waymo with poached employees and taking over company secrets. But the question is, how big is the risk that sensitive company data is being left on an employee's personal device once that person has left the company? I suppose it's quite high, but would you guys want to?
Yeah, so technical hygiene, we're always very good at turning things on, but very poor at turning things off, and finding someone responsible, accountable, and willing to say, yes, we don't need that device anymore. How long you keep it for? Yeah, that's just sanitizing the equipment. But again, I go back to an earlier point where you can sanitize an equipment, but you can't erase a printed piece of paper. And that trust boundary that you're crossing causes huge difficulty. So don't print anything.
I'd say being based in cloud partially solves this problem. So if someone downloads something, then it can be logged and we can escalate it. But generally, if the person left, then he no longer has access to the cloud. And yes, also it's obviously enforcing work profiles, so you can wipe out the device, you can make sure. But generally, cloud in this sense, cloud technologies, they play quite a positive role.
You still need the access management control.
Yeah, I am.
So if you stay in a company long enough, you will get this privilege creep where the first job you had a certain set of responsibilities, and you move within that organization and you find out that you are part of a number of authorized users for things that you haven't touched or cared about for many, many years.
Yeah, I think IAM is definitely a hard area in every fast-growing company with loads of employees. And from what I've seen, every company from big tech to finance, so they all manage it a bit differently. So yeah, that's tough question. Leavers, joiners, so on. But at the same time, I'd say it's one of those areas which are being looked very in depth by the regulators and so on. So it's one of the most controlled areas in some way, which sometimes is a bit strange in comparison to other areas. And yeah, it's really important.
Great, thank you. Next question is a very interesting one, which is a move to a reliance on instant messengers, which I think we all know isn't something that's going to come back out the box. How is this kind of, how do you guys think about this in terms of it causing future issues for DPO because of GDPR and data subject access requests?
It is interesting. Keeping conversations in instant messenger, you have to have the policies around that to say we only keep them for a set period of time. We're creating a huge amount of data, and we have to think about the cost of storing all of that data forever. And we just have to follow the policies and the guidelines to keep what we need, and anything that we do keep, make sure it's got a sticky label on saying how sensitive it is.
Yeah, I think we're having the same issue, and I'd say it's important to when the data is being requested by, say, law enforcement, it's one thing, and it's always better to create the proper stakeholder management and relationships which allow you to act immediately when something happens, other than someone email you in 4 months and saying, oh, hey, this happened, do you have any data? But I think every company which accumulates large amounts of data, especially, and which with the cloud-based companies, they all have this issue.
Great, thank you. And yeah, specific question for Revolut, which is how do you guys deal with alert fatigue?
With what?
Alert fatigue.
Alerts?
Alert fatigue.
Well, I say with remote working is a really good way to find a balance here. And I remember when our company was switching to the remote working, one of the main concerns was that, well, what about the performance and so on? But once we switched, it actually appeared that people tend to work more, and they tend to balance their time better. And for some, this 2-hour jogging in the afternoon might give him power to work until like 7 or 8 if needed. So they're becoming more accessible and more efficient. We also recently, our company implemented the well-being program, which is fairly nice. Obviously, it's hard to maintain something proper with the remote culture, as if you switch your company to full remote working, the general culture suffers, right? It's inevitable. So you have to make it interactive and so on. But yeah, in terms of fatigue, remote working comes in as well. Just generally, well, sports, healthy eating. Remote working, again, influences those habits positively. You no longer have to get sandwich. You can, do something proper. So it kind of all combines here. Obviously, in our case, if you need to take a day off, if you feel overworked, stressed, you can just take a day off. So that's not a problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very sorry to the person also I don't know who said this. We've got one question left, but we're out of time. So whoever had that question, I suggest you reach out to these two guys on LinkedIn, or if you're here, ask in person. But yeah, we've come to an end. Hope everyone who's listening at home or here enjoyed it. I'd like to say thank you very much to Vladimir and Vince for joining me on stage, and thank you very much to the Cyber Tech Forum for having us. Cheers. Thank you.